So I'm excited to kick off a brand new series with you tonight as we look at something that we all need to look at because it's a part of our life. We're doing this series called Free because as it relates to our personal finances, for most people, we don't feel free at all. We feel burdened and we feel kind of weighed down. Statistically speaking, in the West, a person's finances is one of the greatest areas of stress in their life. And so for me, as I think about what we're doing and what we're gonna embark on, I'm reminded that when Lynn and I, we were pretty newly married. So we had gotten married and we almost immediately, we had our, 10 months later after we got married, we had our son Obadiah, or I think it was 11 months later. So we got married, Lynn got pregnant, and then we turned over the church that I was pastoring on the East Coast, and we moved to the West Coast. And I remember once we got to the West Coast, we were gonna start, I was starting to plant another church. And I remember I started thinking about the responsibility that I had as a husband and as a dad. I started thinking about that role of the provider. And I remember one day I was sitting there and I was just pondering this, and I realized that if I were to get hit by a bus that day, that my wife and my son would have been in a really bad situation. And I knew that was the case because we were in credit card debt, and we didn't have any money in savings. And I thought to myself, and that first I thought was if something happened to me, they'd be in a bad way. And then I thought, well, Jesus will take care of them. And then I felt like, well, Jesus said, well, actually, I want you to take care of them for me. And I was very challenged by that. Because I think sometimes what we do outside of the church, we are so focused on finances and we look at the finances from a certain perspective. And then within the church, we were like, well, we don't want to think about that. Jesus is going to take care of everybody. But the thing is, if you read in the scriptures, Jesus uses people to take care of people. God uses people. And so what happened is for me, it began a journey of, I'm not actually doing a good job in this area of my life. And I had to start to learn in this area of my life. And so you fast forward a number of years, and this happened about a year ago. I was talking with one of our pastors on staff, and he started asking me about, kind of principles by which to live your life in Christ as it relates to your finances. And I just kind of rattled off a bunch of things. And he started laughing and he was scribbling really fast. He's like, you talk about this like everybody knows this, and I don't think a lot of people know this, so you should probably tell all of our pastors this. And so, in one of our pastors' meetings, I sat down and I shared all the same things with all of our pastors, and then our pastors were like, hey, you should share this with the entire staff. And then sure enough, at a staff meeting, I shared it with the entire staff, and then everyone's like, we should probably tell this to the church as well. And I was like, okay. And so in a lot of ways, in 2018, as we're ending this year now, we called it a year of deepening, and we had these 3 areas of focus. Right? We've had an area of focus on prayer and fasting because we want to grow in our relationship with God. We have put a focus on being in small groups, and so many of you here at Crossroads are in small groups now. We want more people in small groups at Crossroads than come to Crossroads on a weekend service. That's our goal. We want everyone in small groups. And then the third focus was generosity. And for me, when we talk about generosity, I don't only ever want to talk about it in the context of finances, because for me, the reason generosity is so important in the body of Christ is because really, God is the most generous person you'll ever meet. Hands down, God is the most generous person you'll ever meet. I mean, just the simple gospel message that God gave his own son, Jesus, to die on a cross for your sins and for my sins, that's the most radical act of generosity. And the Christian faith, following Jesus, is literally God transforming us to be more like Jesus. So if God is the most generous person we've ever met, then really God's people should be the most generous people we ever meet, because God is transforming us to be more and more like him. And so when I start thinking about that, I start getting very challenged, because I realize that although we live in one of the most prosperous times in one of the most prosperous countries that ever lived, generosity is not really a strong suit of our culture at all. And then it makes its way into the body of Christ. And then what you have is the people of God who follow Jesus, who is the most generous person who ever lived, but yet we don't reflect his generosity. And what I've realized as a pastor in talking to lots of people about these things is that for a lot of God's people, it's not that they're not generous because they don't want to be. They're not generous because they can't be because of previous mistakes that they've made. And so I want to give you today what I'm calling 5 keys to financial freedom, right? And really this is what I would consider what you call a topical message. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that in none of these ways am I going to tell you how to get rich. And I know that's gonna be like a bummer, but actually what I will tell you is if you do these 5 keys, you will be rich in the most holistic way of looking at what wealth really is. Because when we think of being rich, we always think of materially wealthy, and really riches in God's kingdom is a heavenly riches that makes you holistically wealthy. And so I wanna give you these principles, things that I've learned over the years, things that for me, I wish someone would have told me. And I realize that for each one of us, we're on different steps of that journey. But realistically, if you're alive, you have to deal with your finances, right? It's just part of your life. So whether you're young or you're old, whether you're on a fixed income in the last number of laps of life, or if you're like, hey, I'm just getting going here, you can apply these principles. And these are things that I teach to my kids. Me and my kids talk about this. Because I want to make sure that they have a vision for this part of their life. So I'll start with the first step. It's this, is that money is an outlet of spiritual power. You have to realize that money is an outlet of spiritual power. Now you might say, really? Yes. It's absolutely a vehicle of spiritual power. Here's why. Because according to the scriptures, none of us are owners of the resources we have. We are all stewards of resources. The earth is the Lord's and all of its fullness. There's nothing that you have within your checkbook or within your resources that are actually yours. They're God's, and he has entrusted them to us to steward them. And so the way that we go at our finances, when you begin to realize that you're a steward of God's resources, you begin to realize that it is absolutely an outlet of spiritual power. I mean, Jesus said it this way in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Speaking of finances, he says, no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or money. Mammon was the deification of money in that culture. And so the idea is that if you live your life serving money, you can't live your life serving God, because you can't serve 2 masters. You have to choose one or the other. Now, I realize, and it's funny, we were praying before our service, and somebody prayed, when we talk about generosity, sometimes it feels like you're getting poked in the eye. And I realize that when I say something like that, it's such a challenging statement, because Jesus said that and we follow him, but then right away you think to yourself, okay, so am I serving money or am I serving Jesus? And I'm allowing Jesus to direct the resources he's entrusted to me. And I think unfortunately for a lot of us, we serve money. Our lives are lived seeking, what do we do with this money? How can I spend this? And we live in a culture, especially right now as I'm sharing this message and it's the Christmas season. Really everything right now is about all of these stores making their year-end numbers. So all the sales, it's like, and even the research on the amount of debt that is accumulated in the Christmas season. And everything's driven towards that end. But when you begin to realize that all the resources you have, God has entrusted to you so that you can be a vehicle or an outlet of spiritual power into the world. Like, here's the thing. You find out that there's somebody who needs food. Do you realize that you have resources that can help that situation? When you hear about some situation with someone you know or someone you don't know, and all of a sudden you say to yourself, man, if I was in that situation, if I applied the golden rule to this situation, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, then you say to yourself, oh, can I be involved in that? See, the Bible teaches that wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And the Apostle Paul, quoting Jesus, said that you're more blessed to what? Give than receive. But the ethics of our culture is actually, I'm here to receive. I'm here to get, right? And what happens is, as followers of Jesus, when we get stuck into it's about me getting, I need more, and we're never thinking, actually, all of these resources are an outlet of spiritual power, then all of a sudden, when you neglect that, you actually neglect the whole side of the life that God would have you live. Did you ever notice that in almost all of the epistles of the Apostle Paul is raising money for the work of the ministry of the church? I mean, do you realize we're studying here at Crossroads on Sunday the book of Romans, and you realize that the book of Romans is actually a support letter. The Apostle Paul had never been to the church in Rome. He didn't start it, but he was hoping to get there, and he was trying to raise support for the ministry he was doing. You realize that King David, he wanted to build a temple for the Lord, but he wasn't allowed to, but he had tremendous resources, and he actually funded the project. I could do this all day long, give you all these different examples when you start to realize that your resources are an outlet of spiritual power. But for what I believe that happens for most of us is that we forget that simple premise. That the resources I have, this is a vehicle for the power of Jesus to touch down into the world. And when you start to begin to realize that, when you begin to realize that actually this is part of my worship, these resources are how I worship God, then all of a sudden it changes. And so I want to my first encouragement is I want you to start to pray, Lord, can you show me how money is an outlet of spiritual power? Show me how the resources that you have entrusted to me can be used to grow your kingdom. Lord, will you show me how I should view the resources that you have placed in my hands? Now, I realize when I say something like that, almost the immediate heart response is, oh, well, Fusco, maybe for you, but you don't know my financial situation, right? That's how it goes. It's automatically like, yes, but not me. And I'm here to tell you, yes, and you too. God wants all of us to be involved in this. So the first step is to acknowledge and come to terms with the fact that we're all stewards. The money that you have is God's, and he wants you to invest it into this world. Now, second, I think the key to financial freedom is to realize that a budget is a vision document. A budget is a vision document. Let me explain this to you. A budget is simply what somebody does when you look at how much money do I have coming in, and then how much money do I have going out. But for most of us, we don't budget, we just account for this is how much comes in and this is how much goes out, right? And I'm telling you, that's not a budget. That's just accounting for what you're spending. A budget is a document of vision. When you look at your finances and you have a vision for your finances. Remember I always tell you that if you don't have a vision for your own life, someone else will, right? And I always say that God has an amazing vision for your life and so does the enemy, right? God has a wonderful plan for your life and Satan has a terrible plan for your life. Now here's the thing, if you don't have a vision for your money, somebody else will. And marketing is a multi-billion-dollar industry to give you a vision for your money. So really what you have is that for each one of us, we need to have a budget. Now, again, budgeting is not, this is how much money comes in and this is how much I spend. That's accounting. A budget is saying, this is what I believe God wants me to do with these resources. Does that make sense? And so we're gonna talk a little bit about budgeting, and obviously in this message, I'm not gonna be able to give you all the details. So there's great resources online. Come in the wintertime, one of our board members, he leads a class here at Crossroads that's called Keys to Financial Freedom. I just stole his title. It's so good. Ken Mogseth, who's been a part of this church and an integral part of our family and on our board for many decades. And he gives a much deeper dive that I want to give you right now. But you have to realize is that you have to set a budget, right? And then you have to try and live by the budget, and then you have to actually look to see how am I doing based on the budget. Does that make sense? So it's just like with life. It's like if you have a vision, like I hope that as we're preparing to end 2018 and you're beginning to look into 2019, you're saying, this is how I want to grow spiritually, right? Now, if you say that, then you say, in order to grow spiritually in the coming year, I'm going to do what? You start listing a bunch of things that you're gonna do, right? And then once you get like 4 weeks into the month, you have to say, am I doing the things that I'm trying to do? Does that make sense? So as it relates to a budget, first you need to have a vision for the resources that God has given you. And then you need to actually try and live into that vision. And you actually have to make sure that you're doing the things that you're trying to do. It's kind of like with your New Year's resolutions, right? Like you have the great ideas and then 3 days into it, you're off the rails, right? And then you have to, and for most of us, we're just like, okay, forget it, I'm off the rails. But you have to, once you set a vision, you have to come back and really look at it. Am I doing the things that I'm supposed to do? And I always think about, as it relates to vision, I think of Proverbs 29, verse 18. In the King James Bible, it says that where there is no vision, the people what? The people perish. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't have a vision for your finances, you're gonna find yourself in a tough spot, because there's lots of things when you don't have a vision that will keep you distracted. See, the thing I love so much about living a life based on vision and purpose is it makes a lot of decisions for you. Like, let me give you an example. As a follower of Jesus, right, I know that God loves marriage. So when Lynn and I made the covenant before God and to each other to be married, at that point there's a vision that that's the only girl for me for the rest of time, just her, right? So I go into every day, I'm not like, hey, I wonder who's gonna catch my eye today. Because I'm already, that decision's been made. I have a vision. That girl is gonna be stuck with me for the rest of her life. We're gonna grow old together. I'm gonna be all like, crusty, and she's still gonna be cute as buttons, and she's gonna have to put up with me, and we're gonna be doing that together. And every time we see, like, we'll see a sweet older couple, and they're walking holding hands, and I'm like, that's gonna be me and you. You know what I mean? I always tell them, like, that's us in about 39 years, Or especially if I see an older guy, like a grandfather with like a younger girl, like a granddaughter, I'm like, that's really gonna be us, because you're gonna be young and I'm gonna be old crusty, And so it's like there's a vision for that. And because there's a vision for that, there's lots of things that leave the table, right? And in the same way, in your walk with Jesus, like if you're like, as a follower of Jesus, Jesus said that a person shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Right? So then I think to myself, how often do I like to eat every day? All day long, right? Like if I could eat every second of the day, I would. I just think it's an amazing thing that God gave us food, right? So if that's the way that it is, then how should I be looking at God's word? All day, every day. I don't just want to read the Bible in the morning in my quiet time. I want to think about it during the day. I want to have it memorized. I want to be thinking about it all day long, because if a person shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, then I should be thinking of God's word all day long, right? And so again, it's a vision that you have for your life, and then you learn and you lean into that vision. And in the same way, I want to encourage you to create a budget for your finances that is based on a vision that God has given you. Now, I know someone's gonna say, well, so Fusco, what's the vision? And I'm gonna give you what I believe to be the single greatest piece of financial advice I ever got. And for me, this has been my vision financially for my family. And I believe it's so good that I'm just gonna share it with you. And if you have your own vision, great. But if it's better than mine, I wanna know about it, because I would like a better vision. But I love this. So here it is. You ready? You give 10%, you save 10%, and you enjoy the rest. You give 10%, you save 10%, and you enjoy the rest. Now let me explain that to you, because I know it's like, I love it because it's so simple, and because it's so simple, it's almost scary. So here's the thing, giving 10%, the Bible calls this the tithe. Now listen, some people say, Pastor Daniel, we're not under the law, we're under grace, so the tithe is old covenant. It's true, it is old covenant, but guess what? The law is God's standard for righteousness, and in the name of grace, God is gonna have you be less generous than the law. Does that make sense? So at the very basis, God asked for the first fruits of his provision in our lives. So the first fruits go to the Lord. Now, someone's bound to say, do we give the first fruits on the net or the gross? And I'm here to tell you, if you're squabbling for those type of nickels, then you have a bigger problem. Does that make sense? It's like, because I've heard people say, if you're not giving on the gross, then God ain't blessing that. And I'm like, well, hold on. If you're really squabbling with God, like, it's like, that's a heart issue. But in the first tenth goes to the Lord. Now, what's amazing is, I've always loved reading business books. I've been fascinated by it. If I wasn't a pastor, I would have loved to have been working as an entrepreneur in the business world. And when you read the business books, they always say you got to pay yourself first. And then they pay all your bills second. But the thing is that's what you say when you don't know Jesus, right? When you know Jesus, you pay God first. Because you realize all that you have is his. The only reason you got anything is because God gave it to you. The gifts that you have to make that money, that comes from God. All the ability and the talent that you have, that comes from God. Even the ability to hone a talent, to have a good job, that comes from God. Nothing you have is your own. All of it is a gift. And we return the first tenth back to him, the tithe. So when you take in your money, the first tenth goes to God. Then the second tenth, you have to put in reserves. Now, the reason I think reserves are so important, my friends, is because all the unexpected things should be expected. Does it make sense? Your car, it's gonna break down. The things in your house, that stuff's gonna break down too. And guess what? Your body, that thing's gonna break down also, right? Stuff breaks in a fallen world. And a wise steward of the resources that God has given is always ready for what is inevitable, right? So when someone says, listen, I don't have enough money because my car broke down, anybody who owns a car realizes that your car breaks down. And if you're like, well, I don't want to buy a car, so I have a bike, your bike's gonna break down. Because I've been there. There was a time when I was a church planter, I rode a bike. We had one car, Lynn had the car with the kids, and I rode a bike in the middle of the winter in the East Coast. And it was amazing the things that would go onto that bike. I got 4 bicycles stolen where we were living. That was super fun. You know what I mean? All of a sudden there's tires or, getting nails in the tires, all sorts of things. The brakes go out on it. It was crazy. I got hit by a car a couple times. You're like, that makes total sense. You know what I mean? It's like that stuff just happens. So you have to expect that unexpected things should be expected. And so a wise steward says, when my income comes in, I give 10%, right? And then I save 10%. Because I'm always ready in reserves for what is inevitable things that are gonna need money that I'm not prepared for. And then you enjoy the rest. Now I say the word enjoy the rest because God can direct you in infinite numbers of ways with that other 80%. What I found is that you don't have to only give 10%, you can give as much as you want. You don't have to only save 10%, you could save as much as you want. But that other 80% ends up being the things that you use and utilize. Now, if I were to give you now, if you were to take that vision for your finances, I'm gonna use simple math, but kind of crude math to show you how this would work. So imagine you made $1,000 a month, right? If you made $1,000 a month, if you were to give 10%, then you give $100 to the work of the Lord and the local church, right? So now you have $900 left. And then you save $100, and now you have $800 left. And then with the remaining $800, you pay for your rent, your food, your car, gas, medical bills, cell phone bills, entertainment. Now, when we do it that way, you see how the reason why all of us, or many of us, struggle so much with credit card debt. Because you don't have a vision for it. See, you're saying that's impossible, but if you have the vision for it, I'm here to tell you, if you have the vision for it, now all of a sudden you begin to reorganize your life around the vision. See, remember I told you that Lynn and I were in a bad spot? As a young believer, I learned that you should give. So we always gave. When we had no money, we always gave. We always gave the Lord his tithe. I read it in the scriptures. I'm like, man, that's just how you live. We live generous. God's generous. We're just going to do that. But I never paid myself second, right? And so we didn't have anything in reserves, but I never actually looked at the budget saying, this is how much money comes in. If I want to give God what he deserves, and I want to make sure that I'm preparing my family for what isn't inevitable, and then how do we live on the rest? And because I wasn't doing any of that stuff, the amount of money that we needed to do everything else, given the other things we're trying to do, it just didn't add up. So of course you pull the credit card out, you start swiping. And then before you know it, you're totally in debt. And that's how it goes for most of us. Now I know some of you are saying right now, okay, so Fusco, if that's the case, how do we start? And here's the way you start. right now, no matter where you are, if you're not giving anything, you should start giving something to the Lord. Start with 1%, start with 2%, but that's not the goal. That's just the starting place. If right now you have $0 in savings, the next time you get paid, put 1% of your income into reserves. You have to just start the process. But your goal isn't just to start the process and leave it there. The goal is to start the process and then start to redesign your finances to get all this stuff done. And what I will tell you is that if you begin the process, you will actually get there. Because what I can tell you is for Lynn and I, when we began this process, me and her, we sat down, I said, look, this is, someone had told me this, I know it's true, we are giving, but we have to do these other things, we have to get out of debt, we have to do all these things, this is how I want to do it. She's like, okay, let's do it. And it took us about 14 months, and it was hard. And when we did a budget, we realized, okay, we can't eat out the way we're eating out. We have to actually budget what we spend for clothes, and there's all these things, and maybe we should get rid of the TV. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff, we can't afford all of these channels. We had all those kind of hard decisions. But when God gives you a vision, it's not scary to do that. Like when God gave me the vision to marry Lynn, it wasn't scary to forsake all other relationships with females except for this one. It was like, that's just what you do. And when God gives you a vision for your finances, is it hard? Yes, but you have a vision, so you just go do that thing. And what I will tell you is that we began a process of learning how to live out what is the most simple of visions. We give a tenth, we save a tenth, and we enjoy the rest. Now, here's what I would say. In regards to giving, everybody knows what it says in Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 to 10, right? Where it says, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But they say, in what ways have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now in this day, the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such a blessing that there will be no room enough to receive it. Now, people freak out with that verse. But you hear what he's saying? He's saying, look, if you don't give and generous with me, then I see it as robbing me, and I can't bless you the way that I want to bless you. It's totally illogical to the contemporary mind when you say, actually, when you give, God will give you more. It doesn't make any sense. But that's exactly what he says. And I could bring hundreds of people from our family of faith up here to tell you their story about this. We're like, this is what I was doing, this is where I was, I started to give, and this is what God did, right? And for many of you, you're like, I would love to have that testimony. You can only have that testimony if you honor the Lord with your giving. And so it's a crazy thing how it works, but as we always say, when you take a step of faith, guess what? God meets you on the step of faith. The provision that God gives you is in the step of faith, not before it. Because if he provides for you before it, then guess what? It's not a step of faith. So you have to take the step of faith and you have to say, okay, Lord, I'm trying this thing. That's what your word says. And then you see what God does, and then you're just like, why didn't I do this before? That's how it works. Now, with your savings, common practice says that in reserves, you should have 6 months of your operating expenses. That's common wisdom, that if you had no money come in, you can survive for 6 months without any income coming in, right? That's like the benchmark. So for each one of you in your own, the way that your lifestyle works and all that stuff, it's like your goal should be 6 months. Now I know some of you are like, I'm never gonna have that in savings, right? Because guess what, when I did that and I heard that and I wrote that thing down, I did the count, that was my first thought, like, I have no money in savings and I'm in debt. How am I ever gonna get there? And I was like, that's impossible. But I'm here to tell you, guess what? When you have a vision and you're giving to the Lord and you're paying yourself second and then you're enjoying the rest, guess what happens? Before you know it, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm there. I just talked to somebody just last week who just landed there. We've been talking about it and they're just like, I thought it was impossible. But you just do it and you do it, you work on it and you work on it, and before you know it, you get there. So you wanna have 6 months of living expenses sitting available to you in case you were to need it. That's the goal. Now, as you begin to enjoy the rest, I just want to give you this piece of information and we'll move on. And if you have more questions, I could talk to you about this for years. But they also say common wisdom says that your housing expenses should be no more than 30% of your income, right? And so I put those kind of pieces of information out there because for many of us, one of the problems that we have is that our income is not, 30% of our income is not what we're paying in housing. We're paying way more. And when that happens, then of course, then all your budgeting gets really, really scary. And what Lynn and I began to realize when we realized that budgeting is a vision document and we started living a vision-based view of our finances, then all of a sudden we had to say, oh, guess what? The way that we're living is actually above our means, and we need to either find better jobs or work harder or take side jobs in order to live at this level, or we need to lower what our standard of living is. Because when you're living a vision-based view of this stuff, that's what you start to do. You start to make those uncomfortable decisions. But what we found is by making those uncomfortable decisions, we actually became way more comfortable. Because when you're living outside your means, although you're enjoying it, you're really not enjoying it because it's creating all sorts of stress on the other side because all these other things we can't do. And so we started to realize that when we started to live this way, now all of a sudden, we had to adjust some things and we're like, okay, we're gonna get rid of that and we're gonna stop doing that. And instead of like going out and buying a nice TV, like we'd find someone who was throwing one out and be like, does it work? Yeah, we'll take it, And when we had the lousy TV, we didn't want to watch the TV less anyway because it looked terrible on it anyway, And so we're just like, okay, so we're saving money there. And, and then before you know it, you're like, hey, because I'm not watching TV, I'm reading the Bible. Hey, that's really good. Hey, we're spending more time together. Instead, we're talking to each other instead of yelling at the TV. Great, Well, I yell at the TV, Lynn doesn't, but you know what I mean? And it's like, and so you have all that stuff that goes on, and then you're like, oh, actually, this is way better. But I didn't realize it was better. I was doing it all the wrong way, right? And so you give a tenth, you save a tenth, and then you enjoy the rest. Best piece of financial advice that I could give you. Now, from there, fourth key, debt is not your friend. Debt is not your friend. I know we live in a debt-laden culture. Brothers and sisters, debt is not your friend. To whoever you owe money, you are a slave to that. That's just how it goes. The Bible says, this is what it says in Romans chapter 13, verse 8. It says, owe no one anything except to love one another. So when it says, owe no one anything, you know what anything means? Anything. So listen, if you have credit card debt, you are, in a sense, a slave to the credit card company. You have to make sure you can service that debt. Now, the one thing that I will say is that there is place for what you could call, quote unquote, equitable debt. Most people think of equitable debt as their house, except for anybody who bought a house before the real estate market crash, you realize that was not an equitable debt, right? So you have to realize that this is how this stuff goes. An equitable debt is something that you could sell and recoup your money right away. And really, realistically, someone says, well, I have a car payment. Car payment is debt. You drive a car off of a lot, it loses 30% of its value. So you have to realize what you're doing. Debt's not your friend. And we live in a culture that's actually designed to keep you in debt. If you have a credit card and then you run a balance on and you pay it off, you notice they give you more credit line? You know why they do that? Not because they think you're wonderful. They realize they can make money off you. It's a business decision for them. You're carrying debt, you keep paying it every month, they're collecting interest from you. As long as you keep paying it, they're like, we'll give you more room to go into more debt because we just want to collect your interest. That's how the banks work. I'm not anti-bank, I get what it is, but it's a business thing. Banks don't care about you. You're there, you give them your money, they give you a little bit of interest in your savings account, they take your money and they put other people in debt and they collect money off of them and they make a lot of money in the process. Right? Now, I'm not anti-bank, but when you start to learn how this all works, you begin to realize all the banks want is to put you in debt. That's why how many of us every single day or a couple of times a week, you go to your mailbox and there is an offer for a line of credit for you? Almost all of us, even if you're terrible with money. Why? Because they're hoping if I give you that and you go into debt, we'll make money off of you every single month. which is exactly what they want. But that's not your friend. So listen, if you're in debt, you need to come up with a plan to get out of debt. My recommendation is always, if you have credit card, whatever your highest interest debt is, you want to attack that one first. That's taking the most money out of your pocket. And I'm here to tell you, as somebody who's been in credit card debt, who's had debt of different sorts, I'm here to tell you, if you have a vision to get out of debt, you will. But for most of us, we're in debt, we're growing that debt, and we're never doing anything to alleviate that debt. And really what goes on is that over time, the big problem is the fact that we always think that at some point in the future, something's gonna happen that's gonna get us out of debt. And for almost everybody, that something never happens. So you live your life accumulating more and more debt. But when you realize that we should owe no one anything except to love another person. I just want to share one quick story on this. One of the greatest things that grieves me today as it relates to the younger generation is that the younger generation is coming out of school with so much debt that they actually can't go on the mission field anymore. The number of times someone wants to go on the mission field and they're carrying all this debt, and then you say to them, listen, you really can't raise support to pay for your bad financial decisions. You need to come up with a plan to get out of debt before you can go on the mission field. Because why should God's people have to pay for your life decisions so that you can go serve the Lord? And really what's going on is we have almost no young people stepping on out into the work of the ministry cross-culturally because of the debt that they're carrying. And what's amazing is that's not only true of younger people, that's true of older people as well. The number of older people are like, I would love to go serve the Lord in this capacity, but I can't because of this debt and this thing I have to get fixed. And so we have to realize that debt's not our friend. And here's my last one. And it's simply this. And nobody likes this one, but it's so true. Slow and steady, it wins the race. If you read the book of Proverbs, it's absolutely astounding how often it talks about how wealth is created slowly. See, really the problem is we live in a world that everyone wants to get wealthy quickly, right? But really what you find is if you read the research on people who have windfalls of money, they almost end up losing it all at an enormous, it's like almost 90% of people. Like people who win the lottery, they run out of money. We always hear about these athletes who make all this money and all of a sudden they're going bankrupt. Why is that? Because the ability to handle resources takes character. And really the character is built over time. When all of a sudden you have a windfall, if you don't have the character to be able to navigate it, then you squander it. And so what God wants for us is to learn how to persevere with vision and say, every single day, I'm gonna live into this vision. I'm gonna work on these things. I'm going to grow in these areas. I'm gonna become a person who is generous, and I'm gonna be someone who's wise enough to realize that the unfortunate, unexpected things are actually very normal and they happen all the time. Things break. Jobs get lost. Economies struggle. We lose hours. This is normal. This is real life, right? But because of the vision God's given me, I can weather those storms. I know how to be smart about it. I'm lowering the amount of debt that I have. And you chip away at it. Really, for most of us, we end up in a bad situation, a bunch of bad decisions over time. And really, the way that you alleviate those bad decisions is a bunch of good decisions over time. Just every single day, just showing up, wait, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm getting at it. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. And slow and steady wins the race. And you know what's beautiful, brothers and sisters, is that's not only true for our finances, that's true for our life in Christ. I always think of these verses, Galatians 6, 9, and 10, where it says, and let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. You hear what he's saying? It's like, don't get weary in doing the right things. And I realize for a lot of us, we've developed really bad habits with our money, And the thing is that when you try and make that change, it's hard. But anytime you need to make a positive life change, you have to overcome all of the resistance. You have to change the current of how you deal with that thing. And so I just want to encourage you, as you start that process, or if you're in the middle of that process right now, don't get weary in doing the right things, knowing that in due season you'll reap. If you don't lose heart, if you don't quit along the way. And then we're reminded, do good to all. Remember, I started with the idea that money is an outlet of spiritual power. The reason you want to be financially free is so that you can do good to all. That you start to see your life as, my life is a touch point for the good news of Jesus to reach all sorts of people in all sorts of ways. To where it's like all of a sudden the church is running a mission trip, but you're out of vacation days. You're like, actually, I can actually take unpaid time off and go on that mission trip because I prepared for this, right? I can go do that because God's stirring my heart. All of a sudden you're saying, hey, you find out that a friend of yours has got a situation, right? And you're like, man, if I was in that situation, I hope my friends would help me. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna help that person. But you're not bankrupting yourself to do it because you're actually prepared your life to be available for that. And I'm here to tell you, no matter where you are on this journey, if you begin to see your money as an outlet of spiritual power, and if you budget your finances with vision, and if you honor the Lord giving him his tenth, and if you honor the Lord by saving a tenth, and if you enjoy the rest however he leads you to that and in that, and if you alleviate debt from your life and you chip away at this every single day, I guarantee you won't be stressed out about finances. I mean, you'll get nervous about stuff. But like we see that king in the prophets, when the other king sends him a nasty letter and he lays it before the Lord and he says, Lord, you see this? What are we gonna do with this? All of a sudden with your finances, when something comes up, you say, Lord, you see this thing? Lord, I've been honoring you with my finances. I'm as prepared as I know how to be. Lord, will you work this out? And all of a sudden you begin to realize that God's ways of walking out our finances as stewards of his resources is the hands down most peaceful, joyful, and impacting way to live your life. And I'll tell you, as a brother on the same journey, I'm so grateful along the way people shared these truths with me. And I'm grateful that God gave Lynn and I just a little bit of faith to try. Because we look at our life now and we say, Lord, we want to do good to all, especially our brothers and sisters in our household of faith. We want to be involved in God's kingdom. We want to live lives of tremendous impact. And when we live our lives worried and anxious about money, we can't live our lives fully engaged in God's kingdom because we're distracted. And my hope for us as the Crossroads family, and as we, over the next number of weeks, as we look at this idea of being free in this area of our life from a number of different angles, that it would be the first step for some of us, the necessary encouragement for others of us, the fork in the road for some of us to take steps to allow our finances to be vehicles for impacting this world in the name of Jesus. And I think that for all of us, that's what we want, isn't it? So let's just bow our heads in our hearts as we pray together.